Welcome to Shiver Audiobooks, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we step into the darkness, show some love by hitting that like button and subscribing. It's your support that keeps these stories coming to life. Now enjoy the social score.
Chapter 1. The Golden Ratio. The city New Eden didn't just sleep, it recharged. As the artificial dawn simulated a perfect Mediterranean sunrise over the steel and glass canyons, Leo Wolfe's apartment adjusted itself to his circadian rhythm. The curtains glided open with a whisper of silk, and the espresso machine hummed to life, timing the first drip to the exact moment Leo's eyes flickered open. He sat up and instinctively glanced at the wall-mounted holographic display. Good morning, Leo. Current score, 9.42. Status, Elite Tier. Leo smiled. A 0.02 increase since yesterday. He must have received a community contribution bonus for reporting that flickering streetlight in Sector 4. In New Eden, being a good citizen wasn't just a moral choice, it was currency. He stepped into the shower. The water temperature was optimal, a privilege reserved for those above a 9.0. Below a 6.0, you got lukewarm. Below a 3.0, you got 3 minutes of cold mist. As he dressed in his crisp charcoal gray suit, his lenses, AR implants, overlaid the world with data. Walking down the street toward the Bureau of Social Harmony, Leo felt the invisible warmth of the city's approval. Every person he passed had a floating number above their head. A barista with a 7.1. A street sweeper with a 4.5. Leo barely looked at them. In this society, you didn't associate with those moving in a different social orbit. Good morning, analyst Wolfe. The building's AI chirped as he stepped into the lobby. The turnstile didn't just unlock. It glowed a welcoming green. Your productivity is trending 4% higher this month. Keep up the harmony. Leo took his seat in the glass-walled office of the Data Integrity Division. His job was simple. He was a gardener of the algorithm. He smoothed out anomalies and ensured the scores were reflective of reality. But today, something felt off. While running a cross-reference on the elite tier tax exemptions, his screen flickered. A line of raw code, devoid of the usual UI polish, bled across his workspace. It was an entry for Councilman Halloway. Leo frowned. Halloway's score was a perfect 9.99. It had been for 12 years. Not a single point lost for a late payment, a sharp word, or a missed community gala. It was statistically impossible. He dug deeper, his fingers dancing across the haptic interface. He bypassed the primary firewall, something he wasn't supposed to be able to do, and found it, the Ghost Partition. It was a hidden layer of the social score architecture. It didn't calculate, it dictated. It was a manual override. Behind the curtain of the perfect algorithm, the city's leaders were hard-coding their own divinity while the rest of the world fought for decimals. What are you? Leo whispered, his heart beginning to thud against his ribs. Suddenly, the air in the office felt cold. His AR lenses glitched, static flickering across his vision. A bright red notification box snapped into existence, so large it blocked his view of the desk. Critical violation detected. Unauthorized data breach. No, Leo muttered, frantically trying to close the window. It was an accident. I was just recalculating social score. The number in the corner of his eye began to spin. It didn't drop, it plummeted. 9.42, 7.00, 4.50, 1.20. The espresso machine in the break room stopped. The smart glass of his office door turned opaque and locked with a heavy, metallic thud. His bank account notification pinged. Balance 0.00, frozen by Harmony enforcement. Current score 0.00. Status 0. The lights in his office turned a harsh, clinical red. The intercom crackled. It wasn't the cheerful AI anymore. It was a flat, synthesized voice that sounded like a funeral bell. Leo Wolfe, your contribution to society has been terminated. Please remain stationary. An enforcement team is en route to facilitate your transition to a correction facility. Leo looked at the glass door. Outside, his colleagues were looking at him. Not with pity, but with the blank, horrified stares of people watching a leper. They were already deleting him from their contact lists. In New Eden, if you didn't have a score, you didn't have a soul. He grabbed his bag, his eyes darting to the only thing the system hadn't locked yet, the manual fire escape. Chapter 2. The Void of the Zero. The fire escape was a relic of the old world, a rusted iron spine clinging to the back of the Bureau's gleaming tower. As Leo tumbled out onto the metal grating, the transition was physical. The climate-controlled air of the office was replaced by the humid, soot-heavy wind of the lower levels. He didn't just feel the drop in his score. He felt the city withdraw its protection. His AR lenses, usually a source of helpful navigation and social data, were now a frantic mess of error codes. Warning: unauthorized user detected. Services suspended. Medical transport subsidy. A searing pain shot through his temple. The lenses were trying to force a remote shutdown of his neural link. Leo gritted his teeth, tearing the sleek glasses from his face and smashing them against the iron rail. For the first time in his life, the world was blurry, raw, and terrifyingly silent. He scrambled down the stairs, his heart hammering like a trapped bird. 2 floors down, a maintenance drone, a sleek, white orb with a single blue eye, floated up to his level. It paused, scanning his retinas. Citizen identification required. The drone chirped. Leo didn't answer. He lunged past it, his shoulder clipping the drone's casing. Scan failed. The drone's voice dropped an octave, turning flat and mechanical. Non-citizen detected. Alerting enforcement. Please remain still for tranquilization. Not today, Leo hissed. He didn't head for the street. The streets were a forest of cameras. Instead, he jumped the last 10 feet into a garbage disposal chute, sliding through a tunnel of synthetic waste until he hit the bottom with a nauseating thud. He was in the undergut, the subterranean layer of New Eden where the machinery lived. Huge turbines groaned overhead, and the smell of ozone and rotting biomatter was overwhelming. Leo pulled himself up, his charcoal gray suit now torn and stained. He looked at his wrist. His Citizen Link, a subcutaneous chip, was glowing a steady, menacing red. It was a beacon. Even without his lenses, the city knew exactly where he was. "I need to get it out," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I need to go off-grid." He began to run, staying in the shadows of the massive cooling pipes. Every few minutes, a chime echoed through the tunnels, a citywide broadcast. "Attention citizens. A Level 0 breach has occurred in Sector 4. Subject: Leo Wolfe. Visual data is being uploaded to all active lenses. Reward for location data, plus 25 social points." Leo froze. 25 points. People would kill for that. A 25-point boost could move a family from the cramped low-tier blocks to a mid-tier apartment with real windows. He wasn't just a fugitive. He was a lottery ticket. He ducked into a narrow maintenance crawlspace just as a squad of peacekeepers, their armor a matte, terrifying black, marched through the main tunnel. Their boots made a synchronized clack-clack on the metal floor. "Thermal scan negative," one of them said, his voice amplified by a helmet speaker. "He's still in the sector. Switch to pulse detection." Leo held his breath until his lungs burned. He watched through a crack in the wall as they passed. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of a system that didn't know how to fail. Once the sound of their boots faded, Leo slumped against the cold concrete wall. He was 28 years old, a man who had spent his life optimizing the harmony of others, and now he was the grit in the gears. He thought of the Ghost Partition, the perfect 9.99 scores of the Council. They weren't gods. They were just hackers who had won the ultimate prize. "If I'm going to survive," Leo muttered, looking at his glowing red wrist, "I can't be Leo Wolfe anymore. I have to find the people the system couldn't count." He remembered a rumor, a myth told in hushed tones by the low scorers in the Bureau's cafeteria, a place called the Static, a patch of the city where the sensors were dead, and the zeros lived like ghosts in the machine. It was located in the old subway tunnels, 3 miles east. 3 miles in a city that watched every heartbeat. It might as well have been 1,000. Leo stood up, his resolve hardening. He ripped a strip of cloth from his shirt and tied it tightly around his wrist, trying to muffle the red glow of the chip. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. He stepped out of the crawlspace, moving deeper into the dark, ready to find out what happened to a world when the score finally hit bottom. Chapter 3: The Hunger Grid. 3 miles. In the old world, it was a 30-minute brisk walk. In New Eden, for a man with a score of 0, it was a gauntlet across a minefield of sensors. Leo emerged from the undergut into the fringes of Sector 7, a low-tier transition zone. The architecture here was different, shabbier, with peeling synthetic paint and flickering street lamps. The people moved with a frantic, nervous energy, their eyes constantly upward, checking their own floating scores. Here, a drop of 0.1 meant the difference between a meal and a night of starvation. As Leo moved through the shadows of a crumbling concrete overpass, his stomach let out a sharp, painful growl. He hadn't eaten since the previous night. In New Eden, hunger was a tool of the state. He spotted an automated nutrition kiosk on the corner. It was a sleek, white pillar that dispensed nutrient bars and hydration packs. A woman with a score of 4.2 stood before it, her hand trembling as she touched the sensor. A green light blinked, and a vacuum-sealed bar slid out. "Please maintain your score to maintain your health," the kiosk chirped. Leo waited until she shuffled away, then he stepped toward the pillar. He knew it was a risk, but his lightheadedness was becoming dangerous. He placed his hand on the scanner. The reaction was instantaneous. The kiosk didn't turn green. It didn't even turn red. It screamed. A high-pitched, piercing alarm erupted from the pillar, and a strobe light began to pulse, bathing Leo in a rhythmic, blinding white glare. Zero-tier interaction detected. Authorities notified. Citizens, vacate the area for harmony enforcement. Damn it, Leo hissed, lunging away from the kiosk. The street, which had been filled with the dull murmur of low-tier life, suddenly went silent. Then the panic set in. The people around him didn't try to help. They scrambled away like he was a ticking bomb. To be near a 0 was to risk a negative association penalty. To even look at him for too long could cost them 0.5 points. But one man didn't run. A teenager with a score of 3.1 and a jacket covered in digital patches stood 10 feet away. He was holding his phone, not to call for help, but to record. 25 points, the boy whispered, his eyes wide with greed. "I just need to keep the feed on you until the drones arrive. My dad can get his meds if I get 25 points. Kid, listen to me," Leo said, his voice raw. "The system is rigged. The council." "Shut up, 0, the boy yelled, his voice cracking. "Stay still. Don't move." The sound of a heavy rotor wash filled the narrow street. A Vulture-class interceptor drone descended from the sky, its thermal cannons swiveling toward Leo's chest. A red laser dot settled on the center of his forehead. "Target locked," the drone's speaker boomed. "Leo Wolfe, you are in violation of the Public Space Act. Deployment of non-lethal incapacitation in T-minus 5 seconds. Leo looked at the boy, who was smiling at his screen, watching his own score tick upward in anticipation of the reward. The betrayal hurt more than the hunger. This was the city he had helped build, a place where a child would sell a man's life for a decimal point. Leo didn't wait for the countdown. He turned and dived through the plate glass window of a social hub, a government-sanctioned cafe. The glass shattered, cutting his palms, but he didn't stop. He scrambled over tables and startled patrons, heading for the kitchen. Behind him, he heard the thump-thump-thump of the drone's sonic pulse hitting the wall where he had stood seconds before. The air behind him vibrated so hard it shattered the remaining windows. He burst into the kitchen, a place of steaming vats and robotic arms. He found what he was looking for, a heavy-duty industrial microwave used for bulk food prep. He grabbed a metal tray, jammed it into the door to keep it from closing properly, and turned the dial to maximum. He ducked behind a steel counter just as the microwave erupted in a shower of blue sparks and a localized electromagnetic surge. The kitchen's lights flickered and died. The robotic arms slumped, and outside, the vulture drone let out a dying whine as its sensors were fried by the pulse. Leo didn't stay to celebrate. He found the service entrance and stumbled out into an alleyway. His wrist, the chip beneath the skin, was burning. The red glow was pulsating faster now. The city was angry. He reached the entrance of an old, boarded-up maintenance shaft marked with an ancient, faded M logo. The subway. He pried a board loose and slipped into the darkness, just as the sirens of the ground teams began to wail in the distance. He was underground now. He was in the veins of the city, where the static was supposed to be. But the hunger was still there, and now he was bleeding. He had 8 miles left of his 3-mile journey, because the straight path was now a death trap. Chapter 4. The Veins of the Earth. The air in the subway tunnels was different. It didn't have the filtered, synthetic freshness of the upper tiers. It was cold, damp, and tasted of iron and ancient dust. Leo moved through the darkness, his hand tracing the slime-covered brick of the tunnel walls. Above him, he could feel the faint, rhythmic vibration of the city, a titan of glass and light that was trying to purge him like a virus. His wrist was a throbbing knot of heat. The subcutaneous chip was no longer just glowing. It was emitting a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate in his very bone. It was the leash. If he didn't remove it soon, the system would eventually trigger a localized nerve shock to paralyze him. Just a little further, he wheezed, his legs feeling like lead. He turned a corner and stopped. The tunnel ahead was blocked by a makeshift barricade of rusted server racks and twisted rebar. In the center of the barricade sat a pile of old cathode ray tube monitors, their screens dark and hollow like the eyes of skulls. Identification, a voice rasped from the shadows. It wasn't an AI. It was gravelly, human, and tired. Leo held up his hands, palms out. I'm a 0. My name is Leo Wolfe. I'm looking for the static. A spotlight, powered by a sputtering portable generator, flickered on, blinding him. From behind the server racks, 3 figures emerged. They didn't wear the sleek, tailored suits of New Eden. They wore scrap shrouds, ponchos made of lead-lined fabric, designed to baffle thermal sensors. The leader was a woman with a jagged scar running across her jawline. She held a modified pneumatic nail gun leveled at Leo's chest. Her eyes dropped to his wrist. "You're a fresh leak," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Still carrying the city's bell around your neck. You bring the peacekeepers down here, and I'll kill you before they even clear the perimeter." "I need it out," Leo gasped, staggering forward. "Please. I saw the Ghost Partition. I know how they're faking the scores." The woman's expression shifted from hostility to a sharp, predatory interest. She gestured to the two men behind her. "Secure him. Take him to the surgeon." They didn't lead him. They dragged him. Deeper into the darkness they went, until the tunnels opened up into an old station. Central Plaza, a place that hadn't seen a train in 80 years. Here, the static lived. It was a hive of activity. Dozens of people, zeros, glitches, and shadow tears lived in tents made of signal-dampening mesh. There were no screens here, no floating numbers. For the first time in his life, Leo saw people looking at each other, not at the scores above their heads. In the center of the station was a gutted subway car, converted into a makeshift clinic. Inside, a man with goggles and grease-stained hands was hovering over a workbench. "A tracker," the woman said, shoving Leo into a chair. "Remove it. He says he has data on the council." The surgeon didn't say a word. He grabbed Leo's arm with a grip like an industrial vice. He didn't use an anesthetic. In the static, medicine was as rare as sunlight. He picked up a jagged, high-frequency sonic scalpel. "This is going to hurt," the surgeon muttered. "But being a ghost is better than being a slave." The pain was a white-hot spike that traveled from Leo's wrist to his brain. He screamed into a rag they had stuffed into his mouth as the surgeon dug beneath the skin, severing the nerve links the chip had established. With a wet clink, the red glowing device was tossed into a lead-lined bucket. The hum in Leo's head stopped instantly. The silence was deafening. "You're lucky," the surgeon said, bandaging the wound with dirty gauze. "Another hour, and that thing would have fried your motor cortex." The woman with the scar sat across from him. She held out a cup of gray, lukewarm broth. Leo drank it like it was the finest wine in the city. "I'm Jax," she said, "and you're the first elite we've had down here in a long time. Tell me about this Ghost Partition. We've known the system was weighted, but we've never had a witness." Leo leaned back, the broth warming his chest. "It's not just weighted, Jax. It's a lie. The council isn't being measured. They're the ones holding the ruler. They use the scores to keep the low tiers fighting each other for scraps while they hoard the city's resources. I have the encryption headers for the partition in my head. I can prove it." Jax looked at the people in the station, the hungry, the broken, the forgotten. "If the city finds out the score is a fake, the harmony collapses. New Eden will burn." "Good," Leo said, his eyes hardening. "It's time we stopped playing their game." Suddenly, a bell began to clang at the far end of the station. A young girl ran toward them, her face pale. "The sensors!" she cried. "They found a gap in the dampeners. The black suits are in the north tunnel." Jack stood up, grabbing her nail gun. "They didn't come for us. They came for him." She looked at Leo. "You better be worth the trouble, analyst, because now you're going to learn how zeros fight back." Chapter 5. The Harmony Cracked. The North Tunnel was no longer a dark void. It was a throat of blinding white light. The enforcement squad didn't use flashlights. They used high-intensity photon flares that turned the damp subway air into a thick, glowing fog. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of their hydraulic-assisted boots was the heartbeat of a machine. Leo watched from behind a rusted turnstile as Jax and her crew moved with a silent, practiced desperation. They didn't have armor or laser-guided rifles. They had static bombs, jars filled with magnetized iron filings and salvaged capacitors, and the home field advantage of a labyrinth that had forgotten the light. "Leo, stay low," Jax hissed, her scar twisting as she grinned. "In the upper tiers, they teach you that the system is invincible because it's everywhere. Down here, we know the truth. The system is brittle because it's stiff." The first peacekeeper stepped into the station's vaulted mouth. His visor reflected the makeshift tents of the Zeros. He raised a pulse rifle, the barrel glowing with an icy blue charge. Target confirmed. The Peacekeeper's voice echoed, cold and synthetic. Lethal force authorized for all Zero-class residents harboring Fugitive 41 Wolfe. Now, Jax roared. The darkness erupted. From the shadows of the ceiling, the Zeros dropped a massive lead-lined curtain, momentarily cutting off the Peacekeeper's line of sight and scrambling their thermal sensors. Crack boom. The first static bomb went off. It wasn't a fire explosion. It was a digital one. A cloud of magnetized dust filled the air. Leo watched as the Peacekeeper's sophisticated HUD glitched. The blue light of his rifle sputtered and died. The hydraulic joints of his black armor seized up, the servos screaming in protest as the iron filings jammed the delicate sensors. "They're blind," someone yelled. The Zeros swarmed. They didn't use guns. They used pipes, wrenches, and sheer gravity. It was a chaotic, primitive brawl inside a high-tech nightmare. Leo saw the surgeon from Chapter 4 leap onto the back of an enforcement officer, jamming a heavy screwdriver into the vulnerable neck seal of the armor. Leo felt a surge of adrenaline he hadn't known he possessed. For years, he had lived in fear of a 0.1-point drop. Now, surrounded by violence and grit, he felt a terrifying sense of freedom. He spotted a discarded pulse rifle and scrambled toward it. He picked it up. The weight was familiar. He had analyzed the blueprints for these weapons 1,000 times. But the rifle wouldn't fire. Biometric mismatch. Access denied. Piece of junk, Leo muttered. He didn't try to hack the software. Instead, he smashed the rifles but against a nearby steam valve. The pipe burst, hissing a cloud of scalding vapor into the path of a second Peacekeeper who was trying to recalibrate his visor. The officer stumbled back, his sensors overloaded by the heat. Jax was on him in a second, her nail gun barking 3 times. The Peacekeeper slumped into the dirty water of the tracks. But the victory was short-lived. A second flare hissed into the station, and this one didn't just provide light. It emitted a high-frequency screech, the subsonic compliance frequency. Leo fell to his knees, clutching his head. It felt like his brain was being scraped with a dull knife. All around him, the Zeros were collapsing, their hands over their ears, their noses bleeding. The frequency was tuned to the human nervous system. It was a digital shepherd's crook designed to bring the flock to its knees. Through the red haze of his vision, Leo saw a figure walking through the fog. This wasn't a Peacekeeper. He wore a sharp, white suit that didn't have a single smudge of soot on it. He didn't wear a helmet, only a pair of silver-rimmed lenses. It was Director Sinclair, Leo's former boss. "Leo," Sinclair said, his voice amplified by a neck-mounted speaker. "Look at this. Look at what you've brought to these poor people. This isn't resistance. It's an infection." Sinclair walked toward Leo, stepping over the twitching body of a Zero without a glance. "You found the Ghost Partition," Sinclair continued, his tone almost fatherly. "Most people would have been smart enough to realize that a god needs a throne. We don't keep the scores high for our own vanity, Leo. We do it to keep the city stable. If the people knew that the 9.9s were artificial, the dream would end. And the dream is all they have." "The dream is a cage," Leo spat, his voice trembling as he fought the subsonic pulse. "Maybe. But it's a clean cage," Sinclair countered. He signaled to the remaining officers, who were now recovering. "Take the analyst. Execute the rest. We need to sanitize the sector." "Wait," Leo yelled. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, handheld data slate he had scavenged from the surgeon's bench. It was connected to a long copper wire he had rigged to the station's old emergency broadcast antenna. "I didn't just find the headers, Sinclair. I've already uploaded the Ghost Partition's master key to a timed burst pulse." Sinclair paused, his silver lenses flickering as he checked his own internal data feed. "You're lying," Sinclair said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Check the buffer in Sector 9's relay, Leo challenged. In exactly 10 minutes, the entire city is going to see the council overrides on their own lenses. Every person with a score of 3.0 or 9.0 will see exactly how much you've been lying to them. Unless I enter the abort code. The silence in the station was absolute, broken only by the hiss of steam and the distant drip of water. Sinclair stared at Leo, his calculated mask finally beginning to slip. You'd burn the whole city down just to prove a point? Sinclair whispered. No, Leo said, standing up on shaky legs. I'm just giving the city back its own math. Let's see how New Eden balances the equation. Chapter 6. The Ticket to Anarchy. Director Sinclair's silver lenses shimmered, rapidly processing the tactical nightmare Leo had just dropped in his lap. For a man who lived by the predictable flow of data, Leo was now an unhandled exception, a glitch that couldn't be deleted without crashing the entire operating system. You think you're a hero, Leo? Sinclair's voice was low, stripped of its fatherly facade. If you release those keys, you aren't just exposing a few overrides. You are deleting the only thing that keeps 10 million people from tearing each other apart for a loaf of bread. You are destroying the value of their lives. Their lives have no value under your thumb, Sinclair, Leo countered, his thumb hovering over the send command on the battered slate. They're just decimals in your retirement fund. Behind Sinclair, the peacekeepers stood like statues, their pulse rifles leveled at the huddle of zeros. Jax was watching Leo, her eyes narrowed. She knew a bluff when she saw one, but she also knew that Leo Wolfe had nothing left to lose, and that made him the most dangerous man in the city. Give me the slate, Leo, Sinclair commanded, extending a gloved hand. I'll restore your score, not to a 9.4. I'll give you a 9.9. I'll put you on the partition. You can live in the clouds forever. You'll never be hungry, never be tired, and never be watched. Leo looked at the zeros around him. He saw the surgeon, the girl who had sounded the alarm, and Jax. Their faces were smeared with grease and blood. Their scores, the very thing Sinclair was offering to fix, were non-existent. And yet, they were the only real things he had seen in years. I already have a 9.9, Leo said, a cold smile touching his lips. It's the number of seconds you have left to call off your dogs before I hit enter. Sinclair's jaw tightened. He glanced at his internal clock. He saw the Sector 9 relay buffer filling up. He knew he couldn't hack a physical copper wire antenna from the outside. Stand down, Sinclair barked into his comms. The peacekeepers lowered their weapons in a synchronized movement. The high-frequency screech, the subsonic compliance, died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the ragged breathing of the survivors. Now, Leo said, his voice gaining strength. We're leaving. All of us. We move to the south tunnels, and your team stays here for 1 hour. If I see a drone, if I hear a boot, the pulse goes live. You can't hide forever, Leo, Sinclair warned as the zeros began to retreat into the shadows, carrying their wounded. The city is a machine, and the machine always finds its parts. Then I guess it's time to change the blueprint, Leo replied. As the static crew melted back into the labyrinth, Jax pulled Leo aside. That was a hell of a bluff, analyst. We don't even have a Sector 9 relay connection down here. Leo looked at the slate in his hand. The screen was cracked, and the send button was just a dead link he'd coded in a fevered dream of desperation. It wasn't a bluff, Jax. Not entirely. I didn't send it to the relay. I sent it to the city's automated emergency weather alert system. It uses a different protocol, one Sinclair can't override without shutting down the city's power grid. Jax stared at him, then let out a sharp, bark-like laugh. You're crazier than the rest of us. When does it go off? Leo checked his watch. 54 minutes. By the time it hits the screens, we need to be at the central hub. If we're going to kill the beast, we have to be at the heart when the blood stops flowing. The journey through the south tunnels was a race against a clock Leo had set himself. They weren't just running from Sinclair anymore. They were running toward the inevitable collapse of the world they knew. As they climbed upward, moving from the wet darkness of the subway toward the maintenance basements of the central hub, the first signs of the leak began to manifest. Above them, through the ventilation grates, they could hear the city changing. The rhythmic, peaceful hum of New Eden was being replaced by a discordant cacophony. Shouting, car horns, the sound of thousands of people suddenly realizing that their harmony was a hollow shell. Leo reached the final ladder, leading to the street level directly beneath the council chambers. He looked up at the circle of sky above the manhole cover. 50 minutes, Leo whispered. The score is about to settle. Chapter 7. The Shattered Mirror. The air at street level was vibrating. It wasn't the subsonic pulse of the enforcement teams anymore. It was the collective roar of 10 million people whose reality had just developed a terminal crack. Leo pushed the manhole cover aside and climbed out into the center of Harmony Plaza. The sun was high, but the city's lights were flickering. Above, the massive holographic billboards, the ones that usually displayed serene faces and reminders to stay harmonious, were strobing a violent, erratic purple. Leo looked around. The change was terrifying. People were standing in the middle of the street, their AR lenses glowing brightly. Some were screaming. Others were simply weeping, their hands over their eyes as if trying to shield themselves from a physical blow. Attention citizens, emergency data alert. Council override logs detected. 1,402,931 instances. System integrity compromised. The data Leo had released wasn't just a list of names. It was a visual comparison. On every citizen's lens, a split screen appeared. On the left, their own grueling struggle for decimals. On the right, the council members' scores, which remained a perfect 9.99, even as they authorized budget cuts to low-tier oxygen scrubbers and social subsidies. "Look at them!" a woman shrieked, tearing her lenses from her face and throwing them at a passing automated transport. "They've been eating our points for years." A man with a score of 8.9, a man who had lived his entire life by the book, was currently smashing the window of a luxury boutique. "It's all fake," he roared, his voice breaking. "My daughter died because we were at a 2.4, and they were at a 9.9 for fun." The social orbits were collapsing. A high-tier businessman was being dragged from his self-driving car by a group of low-tier laborers. The invisible walls that kept the tiers apart had evaporated the moment the math failed. "Leo, we don't have much time," Jax said, emerging from the manhole behind him, her scrap shroud billowing in the wind. "The system is trying to reboot. If the council manages to initiate a hard wipe, they'll reset everyone to 0 and start the game all over again. We have to hit the central hub now." They ran across the plaza, dodging panicked citizens and driverless cars that were spinning in circles as their navigation systems lost priority. The central hub, the White Tower, loomed over them like a silent god. Its doors were sealed with thick, blast-proof plating. "How do we get in?" the surgeon asked, clutching a heavy wrench. "That's a 10.0 lock. Even with the leak, we don't have the codes." Leo looked at the digital terminal beside the door. It was still scanning everyone who approached. He saw a peacekeeper lying unconscious nearby, his black armor cracked. "We don't need codes," Leo said, his eyes scanning the terminal's diagnostic port. "We need a paradox." Leo knelt by the terminal and opened his bag. He pulled out the lead-lined bucket containing his own discarded tracking chip, the leash that the surgeon had cut from his wrist. It was still pulsating a faint, angry red, trying to reconnect with a network that had declared it dead. "This chip is registered as a 0, Leo explained, his fingers flying across his battered data slate. "But the data leak I triggered has caused a recursive loop in the hub's security. The system currently sees the Council as 0s because their overrides are public, and it sees 0s as the only uncompromised data points." He jammed the red glowing chip into the hub's external maintenance port. The terminal's light turned from blue to a frantic, strobe-like yellow. The cooling fans inside the door began to whine. "Security analysis. Contradiction detected. Authority vested in null. System logic error. Opening all channels to resolve conflict." With a sound like a thunderclap, the massive hydraulic locks retracted. The great doors of the White Tower slid open, inviting the chaos of the streets into the sanctuary of the elite. "Welcome to the heart of the machine," Leo whispered. As they stepped into the pristine white marble lobby, the silence was jarring. But then, from the top of the spiraling grand staircase, a familiar sound returned, the clack-clack-clack of boots. Sinclair wasn't there. Instead, a line of dreadnought-class enforcers, massive, automated machines twice the size of a man, descended from the ceiling on steel cables. Their red eyes locked onto Leo. "The Council is no longer in the building, Analyst Wolfe." A voice boomed from the hub's central speakers. It was a council member, though Leo couldn't tell which one. "They are at the secondary site. You've won the plaza, but you've lost the city. The hard wipe begins in 10 minutes. New Eden will be a blank slate by sunset." Leo looked at Jax. She looked back, her grip tightening on her nail gun. 10 minutes, Jax said. "I've spent longer than that just waiting for a train. Let's go." Chapter 8. The Ghost in the Core. The White Tower was no longer a temple of order. It was a vertical slaughterhouse of logic. As the dreadnoughts detached from their cables, their heavy metal feet cracked the pristine marble floor. These weren't peacekeepers. There was no human soul behind the visor, no hesitation, no mercy. They were the algorithm's final argument. "Surgeon, the left one. Jax, keep the line," Leo shouted, his voice echoing in the vast, hollow lobby. The first dreadnought leveled a dual-linked Gatling pulse cannon. The air hummed with ionized energy. Before it could fire, Jax threw a static bomb, the largest one they had. The jar shattered against the machine's chest plate, coating it in a thick, shimmering cloud of magnetized iron and copper shards. The dreadnought's red eyes flickered. Its arm twitched violently as the filings jammed its precision joints. It fired, but the pulse beam went wide, shearing a massive column of white stone and sending a rain of dust over the group. "Go! Up the central shaft!" Jax roared, firing her nail gun at the gaps in the dreadnought's neck armor. Leo lunged toward the elevator bank. The elevators were dead, their power diverted to the hard wipe sequence, but the maintenance ladder behind the glass casing was still accessible. He began to climb, the sound of the battle below fading into a chaotic symphony of metal grinding against metal. He reached the 40th floor, the core access. The air here was freezing, chilled by massive liquid nitrogen, vats used to keep the city's central processors from melting down. In the center of the room sat the core, a monolith of black glass, pulsing with a rhythmic, deep blue light. Hard wipe sequence, 68% complete. Target, Global Citizen Database, estimated time to 0.422. "Stop it, Leo." Leo spun around. Director Sinclair stood at the far end of the gantry, silhouetted by the blue glow of the core. He wasn't wearing his silver lenses anymore. His eyes were bloodshot, and he held a high-frequency override key in his hand. "The Council is gone, Leo. They're safe in the bunkers," Sinclair said, his voice strangely calm. "I stayed because I wanted to see if you'd actually do it." if you'd actually pull the trigger on a civilization. This isn't a civilization, Sinclair. It's an ant farm, Leo panted, his hand hovering over the core's manual interface. And you've been stepping on the ants for too long. If you stop the wipe now, the riots outside won't stop, Sinclair argued, taking a step forward. The people have seen the lie. They are tearing the city apart. The wipe is the only thing that saves them from themselves. It gives them a clean start, a chance to build something new. A chance for you to build something new, Leo corrected. You'll just rewrite the rules with a different name. I'm not stopping the wipe, Sinclair. I'm redirecting it. Sinclair froze. What? The hard wipe is programmed to delete the citizens' scores, Leo said, his fingers flying across the cold surface of the glass monolith. But I've spent the last 6 years studying your architecture. The scores aren't stored in the citizen folder. They're stored in the legacy folder, the same place where your Ghost Partition lives. Leo slammed his palm against the glass. The blue light turned a blinding, jagged white. ARI routing wipe protocol. Target. System architecture and legacy partitions. You're deleting the system itself. Sinclair whispered, horror finally dawning on his face. The power grids, the water filtration, the automated transit, it's all tied to the core. If you wipe the architecture, the city goes dark. Then the people will have to learn how to light their own fires, Leo said. 75%. 82%. Sinclair lunged at Leo, his override key glowing with a lethal charge. Leo didn't move. He wasn't a fighter, but he was a man who understood the weight of a zero. Just as Sinclair reached him, a rhythmic clack-clack sounded from the floor. A nail gun barked. Twice. Sinclair stumbled, his shoulder exploding in a spray of blood. He fell to his knees, the override key clattering across the floor and sliding into the nitrogen trench. Jax stood at the entrance to the core, her clothes shredded and her face covered in black oil, but her eyes were burning. "Time's up, Director," she said. Leo looked at the screen one last time. 99%. The monolith let out a low, mournful groan. The blue light didn't just fade. It collapsed inward, like a dying star. Throughout the white tower, the lights flickered and died. The hum of the massive fans stopped. For the first time in a century, the heart of New Eden went silent. Outside, the massive holographic billboards shattered. The self-driving cars glided to a halt. The AR lenses in the eyes of 10 million people went black. Leo stood in the darkness, the only light coming from the moon through the shattered windows. "Is it over?" Jax asked, her voice small in the sudden quiet. Leo looked out over the city. The fires were still burning in the distance, but the floating numbers were gone. There was no elite, no low tier, no zero, just people standing in the dark, wondering what to do next. "No," Leo said. "It's just the beginning. The math is gone, Jax. Now we have to learn how to talk." Chapter 9. The Silent Morning. The first dawn of the analog era did not arrive with a simulated Mediterranean glow. It was a cold, gray, and indifferent light that crept over the jagged skyline of New Eden. For the first time in 100 years, the city's heart didn't hum. No automated drones sang in the air. No personalized greetings chirped from the walls. Leo sat on the edge of the white tower's shattered balcony, overlooking the plaza. Below, the city looked like a graveyard of giants. Thousands of self-driving cars were stalled in mid-traffic, their sleek metallic bodies now nothing more than expensive paperweights. "The silence is the loudest part," Jax said, stepping up beside him. She had traded her scrap shroud for a heavy wool coat she'd scavenged from Sinclair's private office. Leo nodded. He looked at his own wrist. The scar where the chip had been was still red and angry, but it no longer throbbed with the city's pulse. He reached up to adjust his glasses, a habit he couldn't quite break. only to realize again that the world was no longer overlaid with data. "They're coming out," Leo whispered, pointing toward the residential blocks. Slowly, tentatively, people were emerging from their apartments. Without their AR lenses, they looked lost. They walked with their heads down, eyes scanning the ground where the floating numbers used to be. A group of high tiers in silk robes stood on a corner, staring at a stalled hydration kiosk. They were tapping the glass frantically, waiting for a menu that would never appear. "They don't know how to find water," Jax noted, her voice lacking its usual bite. "The system did everything for them. It told them when to drink, what to eat, and who to talk to." "Then we have to show them," Leo said, standing up. They descended the tower, passing the slumped, dead husks of the dreadnought enforcers. In the lobby, the surgeon and the rest of the static team were already busy. They weren't fighting anymore. They were breaking open the emergency manual supply crates that the council had kept hidden for themselves. "Leo!" the surgeon called out, tossing him a manual crowbar. "We found the old water main valves in the basement. They're mechanical. If we can get them turning, the gravity-fed tanks will provide for the lower sectors." Leo took the crowbar. He felt the weight of it, real, physical, and heavy. "Jax, take half the team. Go to the food warehouses. The security locks are dead, so the doors are just metal. We need to distribute the stock before the riots turn into a famine." As Leo headed for the basement, he saw a man sitting on the marble steps of the hub. He was wearing a suit that cost more than a low-tier's lifetime earnings, but he was crying. "My score," the man sobbed, looking at Leo. "It was a 9.8. I worked 40 years for that 9.8. Who am I now? Tell me, who am I without the number?" Leo paused. He looked at the man, really looked at him. Not as a data point, but as a person. "You're a man who's thirsty," Leo said, handing him a bottle of Real, unfortified water from a crate. "And right now, that's the only thing that matters." The basement of the White Tower was a labyrinth of pipes and shadows. Leo and the surgeon worked for hours, their muscles aching, their hands blistering as they fought against decades of rust. When the first valve finally turned with a groan of protesting metal, they heard the glorious, rushing sound of water through the pipes. "One win," the surgeon grunted, wiping sweat from his forehead. By noon, the atmosphere in the city had shifted. The initial shock was giving way to a raw, primal energy. In some sectors, the looting had begun, people taking what they needed to survive. In others, the old tiers were clashing, the resentment of the past century boiling over in the absence of the peacekeepers. Leo returned to the plaza to find Jax standing on the roof of a stalled bus. Using a battery-powered megaphone she'd rigged up. "Listen to me!" she shouted over the din of the crowd. "There is no more harmony. There are no more points. The water is flowing in Sector 7. The food is at the central warehouse. If you fight, you die. If you work, we eat." A man in the crowd, his face bruised, looked up. "Why should we listen to a zero?" "Because the zeros are the only ones who know how to live without a map." Jax fired back. Leo watched the crowd. He saw the doubt, the fear, and the flickering spark of something new. It wasn't the artificial harmony Sinclair had promised. It was messy. It was dangerous. It was human. But then, a shadow passed over the plaza. Leo looked up, his heart sinking. It wasn't a drone. It was a massive high-altitude transport ship, sleek and white, descending from the clouds. It bore the insignia of the Global Social Oversight, the higher authority that New Eden was supposed to be a pilot program for. They're not going to let it go, Leo realized, the crowbar slipping from his hand. They're coming to reinstall the OS. Sinclair's words echoed in his mind. The machine always finds its parts. Chapter 10. The Reinstallation. The sky above New Eden didn't just darken. It became heavy with the weight of global authority. The Global Social Oversight, GSO, transport didn't land. It hovered, a colossal white slab of technology that hummed with a frequency so deep it made the glass in the surrounding skyscrapers vibrate. "They're too late," Jax muttered, jumping down from the bus, her eyes fixed on the ship. "The system is dead. The core is slag." "They don't need our core," Leo said, his voice hollow. "They've brought their own." From the belly of the transport, four massive, arachnid-like towers began to descend on high-tensile cables. They were mobile broadcast relays, active synchronization hubs. As soon as they touched the rooftops of the four tallest buildings, a blue shimmer began to ripple through the air. Leo felt it before he saw it, a sharp, electric tingle behind his eyes. His neural link, the part of his brain the city had spent years conditioning, was being pinged by a new, more powerful signal. Aya! A man near Leo collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Suddenly, the black lenses in the man's eyes flickered to life. A ghost light returned to the eyes of the crowd. "Attention! Global Oversight Recovery initiated, detecting anomalies, restoring backup from 4 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. Citizen 82 Klein, your score has been restored to 7.4. Please proceed to the nearest sync point." The man who had been crying for his lost 9.8 score stood up, his face transforming from grief to a terrifying, vacant relief. He looked at Leo, then at Jax. His eyes weren't human anymore. They were screens. "They're overwriting the reality," Leo whispered. "They're using a satellite backup to put the blinders back on." A booming, omnidirectional voice erupted from the sky. It wasn't Sinclair's fatherly tone. It was a cold, multi-layered chorus of AI voices. "Citizens of New Eden, you have experienced a catastrophic social failure. The static infection has been identified. For your safety, the city is now under quarantine tier protocols. All scores are temporarily frozen at a 1.0 until synchronization is complete. Anyone not at a sync point in 5 minutes will be marked for permanent deletion." "We have to stop those towers," Jax said, her hand reaching for her nail gun. "If they finish the sync, the hard wipe we did won't matter. They'll just download the old world back into their heads." "We can't get to the roofs," the surgeon said, pointing up. "Look." A swarm of interceptor drones, smaller, faster, and more lethal than the ones Leo had faced before, poured out of the GSO ship. They didn't scan. They simply patrolled the space between the buildings, creating a lethal canopy. Leo looked at the white tower behind them. "The towers are connected to each other via a local mesh net. If we can't hit the towers, we hit the ground." "The ground is dead, Leo," Jax argued. "The power is out." "Not all of it," Leo said, a frantic plan forming in his mind. "The old subway, the tunnels where the static lives. They aren't on the GSO grid. They're powered by those ancient geothermal turbines. If we can reverse the output of the turbines and feed it into the White Tower's grounding system, we create a feedback loop, a massive electromagnetic pulse from the bottom up. It'll fry every chip in the city," the surgeon realized. "Not just theirs, ours. The medical implants, the neural links. Some people won't survive the shock." Leo looked at the crowd. People were already lining up, their eyes glazed, shuffling toward the blue lights of the sync points like moths to a flame. They were choosing the cage because the freedom was too quiet, too cold. "If we don't do it," Leo said, "they'll never have a choice again. There'll be data points forever." Jax looked at the GSO ship, then at Leo. She gave a short, sharp nod. "The tunnels are 2 blocks away. We have to move before the interceptors lock down the perimeter." They ran. This time, they weren't running from a score. They were running for the right to even have a memory. As they dived into the maintenance shaft leading back to the static, a laser bolt from a drone scorched the asphalt inches from Leo's feet. They slid down the dark chutes, back into the iron and ozone smell of the underground. Inside the geothermal chamber, the Zeros were waiting. They looked tired, but they were the only ones whose eyes were still clear. "Do it!" Jax commanded. Leo stood before the massive, rusted control panel of the turbines. He didn't have a data slate anymore. He had a heavy iron wrench. He smashed the safety glass and pulled the manual override lever. The turbines, built to last centuries, began to howl. The floor beneath them vibrated until Leo's teeth felt like they were vibrating out of his skull. The needle on the old analog gauge swept past the red line. "Hold on!" Leo shouted. He slammed the final contact switch. A wall of white light erupted from the base of the white tower. It didn't travel through the air. It traveled through the very foundations of New Eden. Leo felt a massive, invisible hand slam into his chest. His vision went white, then black. The last thing he heard was the sound of the GSO ship's engines screaming in protest as its sophisticated electronics were turned into molten silicon. Chapter 11. The 0 Hour. The darkness was not like the silence before. This was a heavy physical thing, a vacuum left behind by the death of a god. Leo opened his eyes. He was lying on the cold, damp concrete of the geothermal chamber. His ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine that slowly faded into the sound of dripping water. Beside him, Jax was coughing, her silhouette a dark smudge against the glowing embers of the fried control panel. Is everyone?" Leo started, but his voice was a dry rasp. "We're here," the surgeon's voice came from the shadows. "But the turbines are dead. Most of our gear, too. That pulse, it was total." Leo climbed to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest. He crawled toward the maintenance ladder, driven by a desperate need to see the world he had just broken or saved. When he emerged from the manhole into Harmony Plaza, the world looked like an old photograph, stripped of its color and its light. The massive GSO transport ship was no longer a hovering titan. It had crashed into the side of a residential tower, its white hull cracked open like an egg. It sat there, dead and silent, its sophisticated broadcast towers bent like broken toothpicks. But the most striking change was the people. The thousands who had been shuffling toward the sink points were now sprawled across the pavement. Some were unconscious, their neural links short-circuited by the EMP. Others were slowly sitting up, clutching their heads, their AR lenses shattered and gray. Leo walked among them. He saw a high-tier woman staring at her hands. Without the lenses, she was seeing the dirt under her fingernails, the wrinkles on her skin, and the gray reality of the cracked plaza for the first time in decades. She looked up at Leo. Her eyes were bloodshot and watery, but for the first time, they were her eyes. "The numbers," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They aren't coming back, are they?" "No," Leo said gently. "The math is dead." He climbed onto the same stalled bus where Jax had stood before. He didn't have a megaphone. He didn't have a broadcast signal. He just had his voice. "Listen to me," Leo shouted. It wasn't a roar, it was a call. "The global oversight is gone. The towers are dead. There is no backup coming. There is no one left to tell you what you are worth." People began to gather around the bus. They moved slowly, painfully, like survivors of a shipwreck. "We have no power," a man called out from the back. "We have no food distribution. The system is gone. How do we live?" Leo looked at Jax, who had just climbed out of the manhole, her face streaked with soot, but her head held high. He looked at the surgeon, who was already tending to a wounded stranger. "The system didn't keep you alive," Leo said, his voice ringing out in the quiet morning. "The machines didn't grow the food. People did. We've been living in a dream where we thought the score was the reality. But look around you. This is the reality. The cold, the hunger, the work, and the person standing next to you. Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out his old Bureau ID badge. He looked at the face on the card, the polished, perfect Leo Wolfe with the 9.4 score. He dropped it into the gutter. New Eden is over, Leo continued. There is no more harmony. There is only the city. We have water in the tanks and food in the warehouses. It won't be delivered to your door by a drone. You'll have to walk there. You'll have to talk to your neighbors. You'll have to decide every single day what kind of person you are without a decimal point to prove it. The silence that followed was long. It was the silence of a world learning how to breathe on its own. Then, the woman who had been staring at her hands stood up. She walked over to a man she would have never spoken to 24 hours ago, a low-tier laborer with a score of 2.1. She reached out and helped him to his feet. It was a small gesture, a 0.1 point action in the old world. But here, in the rubble of the White Tower, it was everything. Leo sat down on the roof of the bus, his body finally giving out to exhaustion. He watched as the people began to move, not in lines, not in tiers, but in small, messy groups. They were starting to talk. They were starting to organize. "You did it, analyst," Jack said, sitting down beside him. She handed him a piece of dry bread. "You gave them the 0. Now they have to do the addition." Leo took a bite of the bread. It was hard, tasteless, and perfect. He looked up at the sky. The GSO ship was still a smoking ruin, a reminder that the world outside would eventually come looking for its lost colony. But for today, the air was clear. There were no numbers in the sky, no scores in the eyes, just the sun, rising over a city that was finally, terrifyingly, and beautifully free.
Thank you for listening to The Social Score, an original production by Shiver Audiobooks. In a world that wants to turn you into a data point, remember that the most important parts of you are the ones that can't be measured. If you enjoyed Leo's journey from the elite to the 0, please support the channel. Like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. If your score hits 0 tomorrow, what's the first thing you do? Join us next time for another journey into the hidden corners of a human heart. Until then, keep your eyes clear and your spirit off the grid.